Well, it's time for Triangulation, Cause-Driven Conversations. This is Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 GMT. You can catch these every Friday, ideally, or when scheduled. Today with me, I'm excited. I've got a former colleague and a friend, Brad Ricca, now from the Southeast Christian Church. Formerly, I knew Brad with the YMCA of Louisville and Louisville, Kentucky. And Brad is still in Louisville, Kentucky. Brad, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited to be with you today.
Well, so you've switched around, and we talked a little bit pre-show and the other day as well. And for the folks that are out there, particularly for the younger up-and-coming staff and people or prospective staffs out there in a mission-based kind of organization like the Y, or even like the Southeast Christian Church where you're at now, give us a little bit of background professionally about, how did you end up where you are today, and some of the roads that you took to get there, and whether or not this was part of the picture that you had back when you were 18 or 19, just fresh out of high school, going into college. So give us a little professional background.
A lot of great questions packed into that. I'd say for me, my life took a big turn when I was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
I was living in Valparaiso, Indiana, near Chicago. Good home life. Things were moving along good. High school years. And the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school, I went on a short-term mission trip. And although, a lot of times you think of mission trips, and you think of people going to some pretty rough places to help out. I went to Australia that year, to a community outside of Brisbane, Australia. And that was one of the first significant events in my life of really being drawn out of my comfort zone, going somewhere away from my folks and, with people that prior to that specific trip had never met them before, and getting to travel the world. All those things combined together really were a launching point for me. And I guess I spent the next several summers doing different mission trips. Sometimes they were more labor-oriented. I remember once I was on a trip in Mexico and we were building a wall. It was a retaining wall that was underground. So it was, if you go there today, you would never know that we'd been there. There was this big hole that was dug next to a very thin brick wall. And we were supposed to build up this retaining wall to help stabilize the brick wall, which was like a border between two properties. So yeah, if you saw it today, it's buried underground. You'll never see the wall that we worked on. But the funny thing about that was we were a bunch of probably, 16, 17-year-olds building this wall, working with rocks, not with bricks, but with rocks of varying sizes. And so we're trying to build this thing, and it's kind of shaped where it angles towards the wall and then it's flat on top. And I thought we were doing a pretty good job, but I remember one of the locals, a Mexican man, came over and he looked at the work and it was kind of like, what are you guys doing? And so he started building a wall, and that, if you ever dig up that retaining wall, I hope you see the section that he built, because it was perfect. And Wow. It was like, maybe he was some kind of stonemason or something, I don't know, but yeah, experiences like that were really pivotal in drawing me out of my shell. I'm an introvert and grew up very shy and a homebody and a mama's boy and all those kind of things. And those experiences early on, even I think they were a shocker to my parents, my mom in particular, thinking my son's wanting to go away. But they were great as far as a way to draw me. And and I think a lot of teens, when they get that experience of going away and doing something that really is not about them, that's about serving other people, it actually does something inside of you, which that was a transition point those years of my life. So I actually graduated high school and had decided and really felt like my calling was to do full-time mission work. And so I went to Bible college in Cincinnati, Ohio. Went through those years and came out of Bible college with a great experience, and I'm so grateful for the time I had there. But actually, coming out, my wife and I, we got married the year before our senior year of college. And we came out of school and thought, we're not ready to go overseas. We're not ready to do this yet. So there's a long story. I'm going to spare you some of the details because I don't want to go too long. But we ended up in Dearborn, Michigan. And through a series of events, Jeff, I don't know as far as folks that are watching this show today or watch it later on. I'm sure there's folks coming from different faith backgrounds.
Absolutely.
So from my perspective, I'm a follower of Jesus, and so when I pray, I very much believe in God's will for my life. So we go to Michigan, and I have a Bible college degree, and I'm thinking, wow, I've got to provide. I'm supposed to provide for my wife, but I don't see myself in full-time ministry right now. This is kind of a conundrum. What am I going to do? And so for me, it was a time of prayer, and really a growing and stretching time for me, of saying, God, I believe you have a plan, but I don't see how it's going to fit together, because we think we're supposed to be here in Michigan, but what am I supposed to do? Because we gotta pay the bills. And an opportunity opened up at a small software company in Farmington Hills, Michigan. They were looking for, they in the paper it said entry-level programmers. Now, I took one programming class in high school of Turbo Pascal. So I thought, if you can't be any more entry-level than that, right? So I applied, and I got into this program. It was an amazing experience, and Paul Greenstone was the founder of the company. I don't know if he still owns the company or not, but just a neat man from a philanthropic perspective, who he had a successful company, and certainly as a businessman wanted his company to succeed, but he also wanted to do something for the community where he lived and where his company resided. And he thought, I want to do something more than just give money to local organizations. That's helpful, but let's do something bigger than that. And so he said, I'm going to start a training program. We're going to look for people who have some kind of technical aptitude, but we will train them to be programmers. And that's what happened. I got into this program, and I mean, as green as you can be when it came to technology, although I liked technology and I had an aptitude for it, and got into the program, and we were trained on some more modern computer languages, and eventually became billable for the company. And so we benefited from that experience. Paul Greenstone's vision was being lived out through those of us going through the program, and then we became an asset to his company. So it was a really neat model, and another early experience of what does some real deep philanthropy look like when someone wants to do something pretty spectacular. And I think Paul Greenstone was doing that pretty neat. So I got into IT, and that was back in 1999. And so from 99 until 2012, my background was in technology. We lived in Michigan for almost 2 years. My wife is from Louisville, Kentucky, and through a series of, hey, let's get close to family and all that, we moved to Louisville. And another funny scenario of coming to Louisville and feeling like, what am I going to do? I haven't been really in technology to really tout my skills yet. I haven't been there long enough. I didn't feel like. I didn't have a degree in technology, so I was really low self-confidence when it came to being, selling my skills or whatever. And we were at dinner one night with some friends that we had met through my in-laws, through church. And the woman of this couple was the CFO for the YMCA of Greater Louisville. So we're talking, and a lot of my programming experience when I lived up in Michigan was on the AS400, which most people, what's an AS400? You know what that is, don't you, Jeff? You've heard of AS400. They're not around much anymore. But I can remember thinking, how am I going to find a job? Because this is a platform that's dying. I'm kind of like a dinosaur, and I just got started. And we were at dinner one night, and Kim looks at Kay Manning, CFO for YMCA in Louisville, and says, Kay, do you know anybody in Louisville that has an AS400? And to me, that was the silliest question. You just don't ask people those kind of questions, right? And Kay said, well, we do at the Y. And my wife got so excited, and she said, oh, this is great. And that same conversation, same night, Chinese food, it was a great dinner. Kay says, and we also actually, our strategic plan has identified some specific IT needs this year, and one of the things we're doing is adding another resource, a person in our IT department. Why don't you apply for it, Brad? And it kind of was one of those moments of, for me, feeling like I couldn't have orchestrated this. So again, for me, my perspective is God's will coming together. But yeah, so you fast forward through several months, and we end up in Louisville, and I end up at the YMCA. And that kicked off, for me, an experience that started in, I guess that would have been 2001 is when we came to Louisville. In November 2000 we moved here. So from then until 2012, in IT at the Y. And there was one small stint where I actually left the Y to help with a family company. My wife was in real estate. She said, hey, can you help us with the office? And I did that. But I got invited to come back to the Y, and leaving a family business is not easy. But I was so excited to get back to the Y because it was the Y, which I love the Y, but also it was a unique opportunity in IT, and that was exciting to me. So a couple of passions coming together. So that, that from a professional perspective, that's when I got started with the YMCA in IT, and literally started doing desktop support, helping people when their computers would break down.
Sure.
The Y was benevolent because I didn't really know what I was doing, but I could sure reinstall software or whatever. And I guess more than technical experience, I cared about people, and that was something that was really important to the Y. And so the years passed by, and I was really blessed with my experience at the Y. In fact, I so much believe that my experience now here at Southeast Christian Church, I've been a member here for many years, but just on staff for 2. But so much of my experience here, I feel like is going so much better than it could have because of my experience at the Y, for a lot of reasons. So I'm so grateful for the lessons I learned and the time I spent at the YMCA. And there were a lot of lessons learned, some hard lessons learned, some that were easy, some that were good. All around, the Y changed my life, those 12 years at the Y, or 10 years at the Y.
Yeah.
Whatever it worked out to. So
absolutely. Well, let me pause right there and point out that this is going from people. You need to listen to the big picture here. This is a picture of somebody that wanted to go into missionary work, having been exposed to some summertime missionary work in Mexico and other places, and Australia, right? And so then went to Bible college as a result of that. So this is a whole collegiate dedication was in a completely different area, and yet at the core there's this whole which is what triangulation is all about. There's this whole cause-driven aspect here. This is not a typical conversation that you're going to hear somebody that's climbing up the ranks in the New York City Stock Exchange or something like that. This is all about where you felt you were being led and where you felt you could help others. So there's at the core of all of that, there's a human service thing. So my kind of takeaway from this is, for those of you that are watching this, is don't be discouraged. One, if you kind of really don't know what you're going to do, or if what you're going to do doesn't turn out to be what you thought you were going to do, listen to this story. It's just turned around, and now it's come full circle back, albeit 10, 12 years later, to where now you're actually probably doing more along the lines of the work that your degree was based around, having gone to a Bible college, right?
Oh yeah, and it's so funny. I tell people now, I can remember. I mean, this is a little bit of peeling back the onion and seeing some, the emotional side of Brad. But I didn't want to go back to reunions for school and meet my peers and hear them say, "Yeah, I'm in ministry, or I'm doing this and this and this," and for me to be the guy that was doing IT, because I felt like that's not what I went to school for, And there's a lot of, I guess, being too concerned about what people thought of me, issues and that kind of stuff, right? So 12 years go by, and really, I feel like those were 12 years of a lot of change for me. And I got to the point where I really believed I'm supposed to be at the Y. And, I believe God opened doors. I can't deny that. So I better embrace this opportunity. And so now when I tell people my story, and I talk about those years of being in IT, and the majority of those at the Y, I really feel like the Y was the tool that the Lord used in my life to change me, to mold me into the kind of person that I need to be. So, and there's so much that comes out of that. A big part of it for me is realizing how important character is. That right. I find that I've been invited into opportunities more than once where I've even said here, my boss isn't in the room, but I've said, if he knew how little I actually knew when he wanted to hire me, I don't think he would have hired me. And I kind of joke with that, but at the same time, I feel like it's true that I recognize I don't have all the right skills to perform masterfully at the roles I've been called to, but I've learned character. And a big part of that was YMCA. I mean, I think of people that I spent time with at the Y, how much caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility play a huge role in who I am today. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. My parents raised me that way. But
Absolutely.
it's one thing to say, Mom and Dad want you to believe this, but when you get out on your own, and you go into college and post-college and all that, that's when the rubber meets the road, and you get to really live out who you are. And so the why, for a guy that was relatively fresh out of college and then through my 20s and early 30s, the why played a huge part in helping mold me into the person that I really believe I'm supposed to be.
Well, and there's a very similar connection too between churches, schools, and the why, at least in most parts of the world, in that it's a human services organization. At the end of the day, it's about touching somebody's life, transforming lives. I know is used as a tagline that's used in many YMCA's. I was looking at a YMCA in Popayan, Colombia, this morning, as I was featuring a video contribution of theirs, and it says in Spanish, it says transforming lives for whatever it was, however many years, 160, 140, whatever. And kind of what you're doing in all of this has been that connection with people's lives and transforming lives, and you rolled off your tongue, caring, honesty, respect, responsibility, which of course, if you're in the why, those almost sound like one word. They all just roll off your tongue. But that really does. It becomes a part of the way that you can verbalize the kinds of core values, and that you can teach little children those same kinds of things around those very four core succinct things. And like you said, you got a good background with your parents. And as we know, now from where you are, from where you were in the why, that not all children have the same opportunity.
Right.
So it's important for organizations like the church that you're with now, the Y that you were with, and the other churches and Ys around the world, quite frankly. It's important for people to understand that they've got to continue to move those values forward. They don't just necessarily automatically come in 100% of the work that's of the families that exist out there. There's some pretty tough situations. So talk to me a little bit about, that's interesting that you had that software background as well. And as I'm sitting here learning as well, that I've only known you as an IT guy. The context for our relationship has always been around, IT director level people around various different YMCA organizations around the country. And now I'm hearing about this as whoa, there's some pretty interesting background there. Let's go back into, and you can pull this back from, I guess it's mostly the why, because that's been mostly the deeper, the 10-year kind of stint that you did there. But what are a couple of situations that you can recall specifically in your dealings, where not with technology but just with people in general, that you were able to witness from your time at the Y? And then I'll bring that up. The next question will be the same kind of thing in your short, right now, 2 years that you've been with the Southeast Christian Church. But for now, we'll start with the why. A couple of things that pop to mind where you've really been able to see people impacted positively.
Yeah, one story, and we talked about this briefly earlier this week when we were planning for today. The Livestrong program, the I know is a program in the United States. I don't know if it lives outside the United States or not, but and I don't know a lot about it. All I know is that for people who have some form of cancer, the Y has a program that brings those people in, and I presume that Livestrong is even lived out differently across the United States.
Sure.
In different YMCA's across the country. In Louisville, folks that have cancer come in, and I guess there's a grant associated with that, and so they actually get free membership to the Y for a period of time. I think generally these are people who are coming in that, I don't know if it's that they're in remission or that they're in the midst of their chemotherapy, but they're at some point in that process. But they actually get put into a cohort of other folks who are experiencing some of the similar situations that they are. And then there's, and at least in Louisville, we have a staff person who, she has a little bit of a medical background. I don't know if Barb is a nurse or a doctor or what, but I know she understands more about some of the issues that folks who face cancer are dealing with. So she leads this program. And so people come in, and there are group sessions, even from the sense of just getting around a table and sharing stories. You know, they get to do that. And so I'm sure there's some sense of camaraderie and, hey, we can get through this, that comes from seeing someone sit next to you that says, yeah, this is my second time through cancer. I beat it the first time, I'm going to beat it this time, and you can too. You know, there's some power that comes from that. But then there's also just the actual being in the YMCA and getting to use the facility in a way to help improve your body so that you can regain strength and balance and whatever else might come along with that.
Right.
So my story with Livestrong, a few years ago, this is maybe 4 years ago or something like that, in church, I was in a volunteer role, and I was with a group of men, and we volunteered every weekend during one of the services. And one of the guys in our circle of friends, Sam, had cancer earlier in his life. I didn't know him during his first bout of cancer. My understanding was it was a devastating time for him. Nearly died. You know, literally was shocked back to life. So some time passes. I get to know him in the middle of that time when he's in remission. And he had been told by his doctor that if he could make it 3 years, I think it was maybe it's 5 years, 3 or 5 years without a recurrence of cancer, then the likelihood of him never developing cancer again was really high.
Wow.
Well, wouldn't you know it, that he was within like 6 months of hitting that window, and some cancer pops up. And so that was a big blow for him. So he goes through a process. It eventually gets to where he has to go to Vanderbilt in Tennessee and have bone marrow transplant. And his whole story around that, and the person that once there was a match, somebody else somewhere, I don't even know where they came from. They were not from anywhere near where we live in Louisville. Somebody was on the bone marrow registry, and whatever the medical stuff is behind the scenes, it says, hey, you're a match. This person says, yeah, I'll donate some bone marrow, which I guess is not a really pleasant thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Sam goes down, gets this transplant, and then it's a matter of waiting, you know, is it going to take? And it does, but that whole time, he was incredibly sick. And I've not really been around a lot of people that have suffered from cancer. So I would say I didn't know the best way to care for him and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So, and even from the standpoint also of him not wanting to be around people once he's going through chemotherapy because of, you know, I don't want to get sick. I mean, he even for a while stopped coming to church.
Wow.
Because it was, hey, I can't be with everybody. So really, in a sense, began to fall into isolation. So, you know, here I, from time to time, would think, what are we doing? We're supposed to be some folks that he's pretty close to, and we're not doing a good job reaching out to him. And one day I walk into one of our branches of our local YMCA, and there's Sam. And you kind of look, Sam, what are you doing here? And he's got his mask on, and he was incredibly thin, and he would kind of just shuffle his feet as he walked. But he said, well, I'm in the Livestrong program. What? Yeah, I had no idea. All of a sudden, Livestrong meant a lot more to me because he was a friend of mine who was in the program.
Sure.
So, you know, then once we had this connection, I would talk to Barb, who was over the program, and say, hey, I know Sam. He's in the program. She's like, oh, we love him because not only is he benefiting from it, but he's actually involved in a special way, impacting the lives of other people in the program and all that. So Sam comes out of his chemotherapy and his transplant and all that kind of stuff, and he is really restored back to health. And the major player in that for him was the YMCA.
Wow. Yeah,
which for me was really interesting because there's a whole aspect of at the church, you know, our emphasis is on the spiritual realm, and we want to make sure people's spiritual needs are being met.
Sure.
But when it comes to physical needs, we don't do a great job with that, right? I mean, generally speaking, I can say, hey, come to the gym with me kind of scenario,
right.
But as far as like my church doesn't run a Livestrong program, or we don't run programs that are trying to get food into inner cities where there's food deserts and that kind of stuff. So it's just a different scenario. So here was a situation where the Y was filling a very important need in Sam's life, and he even said, the Y saved my life. So his affinity for the YMCA just went out the roof. And for me, it was a really special time to see the role that the Y played in Sam's life. And I know the Y does that in so many people's lives, but it was, wow. When you talk about transforming lives, sometimes that's a process of, the why helped me see something in me that I never could see. So that can be through youth sports.
Sure.
A child that's
Sure.
playing t-ball that, oh, you got the hit, and all of a sudden confidence, goes up and all that. But for Sam, his transformation was literally, I didn't die, and I think that's because of my involvement in this program at the Y. Now, I don't know many Y programs that can make that claim that they actually save someone's life, but it's pretty neat. I love to think about that and how Sam was impacted by the YMCA.
Well, it is so huge. And again, that's the perfect, it's kind of the perfect balance of the way that I see the triangle, which is, again, it's what this conversation is fundamentally based on. It's that cause driven, and it's around the spirit, mind, body. It's that whole triangle of the Y. And somebody, the founder of the Y, George Williams, in 1844, he obviously, it all started out as pretty much Bible study and helping young lost men in London, avoid all of the evils of the times then. So it was totally focused around Young Men's Christian Association, but completely from the beginning. It was always about those three together: spirit, mind, and body. And that, you're absolutely right. And maybe not every organization, as you've mentioned, can do all of those, and maybe not every organization even has all of those as its core. And that's one of the things that the Y, more than anything, with that position, and not all YMCA's emphasize those three things equally, or some of them maybe not even at all. Some of them it's just body, perhaps. But I think there's a real balance there, and this story that you mentioned really brings that out. There's an emphasis there that imagine if Sam was so physically weak, what's going to happen to his mind? What's he thinking about then, and how do you think his spirit is going to be if he has trouble lifting his foot in order to take one step at a time? So I see them as, and I think you see them as, they're interconnected. They're really inseparable in order to be of maximum benefit.
Yeah, it's true. And that's one thing I love about the Y. I hope that anybody in my community sees my church and says, I may not believe the same things they do there, but I'm welcome there. I'm not going to kid myself to believe that's where people are. That's where I'd like to see us be. But the YMCA is a place, I think, more and more every day where, whether it's Christians or Muslims or Jews or Buddhists or anybody could look, or people of no religion could say, yeah, I don't have the beliefs of people in that church or that synagogue or whatever, but that's a place I can go and I can belong there, and we can have community. And so there's something that's really special that happens there. There's another story that I think is pretty neat. Like a lot of communities, Louisville is I won't get my language right, but there's a resettlement program by the government to bring Somali refugees to Louisville.
Oh, wow.
So there's actually a fairly large population of Somalis that are in Louisville. And I guess this would have been, again, a few years ago, there was a local community center, I think it was called the Presbyterian Community Center, that was running a program called Arcadia. And it was an outreach to youth that were in the Somali refugee population. And some of it was ESL kind of stuff, because literally folks were being brought in by federal government, dropped into Louisville, and Louisville as a city was trying to do something, but the city government, I don't think, was doing its best at helping assimilate folks to life in Louisville, Kentucky, USA.
Right.
And so you had Catholic Charities was trying, and different agencies trying to, how can we help? Some of it was take me to the grocery store because we don't have 500 boxes of cereal in my market in Somalia. So there were just some real basic things. Well, Arcadia was trying to meet some of those needs. The Presbyterian Community Center in Louisville, unfortunately, it ran out of funding. So they got to the point where the board of directors, they were cutting programs and said, we got to make a change. And they were in partnership with our Metro United Way. And there was a conversation with the United Way saying, we believe in this program. We can't continue to run it. Is there anybody else in Louisville that you think can? And the United Way reached out to the YMCA of Greater Louisville and said, this seems like this could really line up well. I mean, one of your focus areas is youth development, and this is a program that primarily focuses on youth. Youth development and social responsibility really coming together really well.
Right.
And you could say throw in healthy living too, because we're going to, play soccer with these kids and that kind of stuff. So Arcadia got taken over by the Y, and since I've been I still go to the Y almost every day during the week. But as far as some of the bigger programs, I haven't kept up with which programs are still running, so I don't know if we're still doing the Arcadia program. But when we did, it was so neat to see. These kids were coming, and they get off a bus after school, and we had an area, a building in town where there was a basketball court, and so they'd be playing basketball and get to play games, get some help with homework. They got fed a meal that night, and so there was an aspect of community. They were getting to interact with adults who cared for them, so they were modeling, the values that we believe in as an organization. So there were a lot of good things that came out of that. But some of the more interesting, specific examples that I go, wow, that's pretty cool how that worked out. At our Southeast YMCA, there was a gentleman who of Somali heritage. He ends up getting a job at the Southeast YMCA in Louisville, and so he's working the front desk in membership.
That's great.
So literally, gone through the experience of coming to America and trying to get his feet on the ground, and now he's got a job at the YMCA. And the program also had an emphasis on college readiness and then even getting into college. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden, wow, this is pretty neat what's going on here. And so, again, transforming lives, seeing that happen with people who, I'm not going to say if it wasn't for the Y that they would not ended up where they are today. I think some of the refugees that come over, they're going to work really hard to succeed a lot of times. Sure. They're going to find a way to do it. But the Y sure was the opportunity, the conduit for many folks here in Louisville to get them going on a successful life, and I think that's pretty exciting.
Well, that's a great story. I'd never heard of that. I know that there are a variety of those kinds of things. I know in Houston that they have a whole international emphasis, not just a single sort of country of origin, but multi-country of origin integration and helping with integration, but also helping with immigration and papers and visas and doing the whole 9 yards. It's like that, especially if English is not your first language. I mean, let's face it, we got to deal with the government and all the forms and regulations. It's hard enough for Native Americans to deal with that, let alone somebody being dropped in here and not familiar with it, all the way to a simple thing like you mentioned, going down a 20 aisle stacked to the brim full of every kind of foodstuffs you can imagine grocery store, and not even wondering, not even being able to fathom that, where they've come from a land of perhaps not a lot to this land of plenty, and that truly is a shock as well. So that's interesting. What kind of, I know you've been with the Southeast Christian Church now for a couple of years, so you won't have as many, maybe the volume, but I'm sure you've got some impactful stories there as well. Plus, your role shifts, obviously, from what you are now. You are a disciple-making pastor, I think. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's that's the catch-all term, I guess, or title for the role that I'm in. I have two focuses in my role at Southeast, and the team I sit on. There's a team of us that we're called the groups team, and our groups team is focused on adults in the church, and so any kind of adult activity, whether it's traditional Sunday school classes or community groups or outreach to singles who are trying to find a place to belong, even seniors in the church, different ways we gather people together. If it's an adult, somehow it's attached to us, and we get to be in that space.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how do you classify an adult?
Really, anything, I won't say a little beyond post-college age. Because we have some folks on staff who focus on college age and young adults that are kind of in the early 20s, and kind of figuring out where life is. But at some point when you kind of get beyond that state of, I'm kind of a college kid or I just finished college, into, so this is life, this is it.
Uh-huh.
That's when we get to interact with those folks. All the way up to then, I'm 100 years old.
Got it.
And, life is very different for me now.
Got it.
So in that space, my particular focus, one of those is what we call weekend groups. Now, it's, people kind of giggle because that's Sunday school. Weekend groups are what we call Sunday school. Somewhat, for us, a weekend group isn't just a class.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, Kim and I have been in our group that meets on Saturday nights after our worship time since the year 2000. And
Wow.
we actually came into that group because my in-laws were members of the group. And so we were, for quite a while, youngest people in the class. Really, everybody was the age of our parents. But we loved those people. We still do love them and have great relationships with them. And so while we've seen over time the classes begin to change and there are slowly more younger people coming in, that still is a community that we identify with. And so we study the Bible together, but then we also celebrate life together. So like tonight, literally tonight, we're coming together for a baby shower for someone in the group, and we're going to just, show some love to this young couple that having their baby soon. And we also mourn the loss of folks when someone dies. Really, our group, and I'd say we average anywhere from 30 to 40 that meet on a weekend.
Wow.
For us, we're in a fairly large church, so this really becomes the place where we feel like we belong.
Yep.
So we have a lot of connections throughout the church, but we're closer to these folks. So weekend groups exist all over Southeast, and as a staff person, I get to interact with the teachers and the leaders of the weekend groups. So I don't know if that's half my job or 30% of my job or 60%. I don't know where it kind of goes back and forth. And then the other aspect is for people that are new to Southeast who decide, really there's two aspects to it. Either I've decided that I want to be a believer in Jesus and I want to pursue him, or people who say, I'm already a believer in Jesus and I want to make this the place where I regularly worship. I want to be a member of this church. Mm-hmm. Those are new members for us, and so I get to work with all of our new members. And really, I should say more so through volunteers. The volunteers actually do all the groundwork, but my focus is with all the volunteers in that capacity.
So so you're the staff person in that group, and most of the people in that group then, so you're providing the leadership to that group, is that right?
Yeah, on both sides of that. And it's interesting with weekend groups, the role of the teacher of the class is pretty unique in my experience. There's one guy who, Phil, he is in his 70s. He leads a group that's probably around 40 people or so that gather every Saturday night. Phil told me one time when he's preparing his lesson on a weekly basis, and he really wants to see, as people come, they obviously say, we believe enough in the Bible that we're going to commit time to come and study it. So he really wants them to see some change in their life, to transform people again.
Yep.
He said, Brett, I probably spend 15 to 20 hours a week on my lesson. I know, I said 15 to 20. Wow, because I teach a class on Saturday nights. I don't put in that much time. But that's how much he really believes in it.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're also unique. My experience, well before I was on staff, just in a volunteer capacity, teaching the class that I still teach. I kept doing that even when I came on staff. There was a man in our class who, well, actually, I take that back. It was before he died. His wife died. And when Liz died, Lauren wanted me to do the funeral because I was the teacher of their class.
Wow.
And so, yeah, my first funeral I did was as a layperson for someone that was in my class. And so those kind of things happen, and the relationships get pretty tight with folks in the class. So I've got an experience of in my class on Saturday nights, my role there is really more volunteer related. It's not staff related.
Got it.
But then as a staff person, I get to work with the teachers and leaders of all the other classes. And and a lot of my emphasis, the way that we work, I don't tell the classes, here's what we want you to teach. We want our classes to teach from the Bible, and some people choose topical lessons, some people go into a real deep study of a particular book of the Bible. Mm-hmm. But my interaction is more so, if we really believe that our role as the church is to make disciples, how can you be most effective doing that? And so it's more a conversation of how do you actually lead and teach in a way that brings about transformation and isn't just a religious act. Because, it's good to be in church, but from my perspective, just kind of going through the rhythm isn't really what we're called to do. We're really called to accept the fact that being a follower of Jesus means sacrifice, and I am willing to change my life and all that. So, and our leaders want that. So I get to work with the leaders and saying, how do you lead in a way that actually helps people make changes in their lives?
Well, that sounds awesome, and you're working also again with volunteers. So that's which there's very much a similarity between your previous work, or the previous environment at least, at the Y, because the Y is also a volunteer-led organization, and obviously the church depends massively on volunteers.
Oh yeah.
Most
You know,
churches don't have big staffs.
Yeah, and that's one thing I feel like so many times, unless I'm a volunteer who has heavily engaged in any activity volunteer-wise and really have been passionate about it, I think it's so easy to overlook how much impact a volunteer can have.
Mm.
I mean, and I see that here at Southeast, but also in my time at the Y, there are some people who you just see they care so much about the outcome of what the organization is doing. Jim was the CEO or the chairman of the board for the Louisville Y for many years. He had a busy life. I mean, he's a leader in business in Louisville, leads a investment company or something like that. But he was always at the Y, but also a man of character. He actually started out. Our local YMCA runs the Safe Place program, where there's all over Louisville. A youth can go into, where really anybody that's in trouble can go into a building. It's designed for youth, fire station or different restaurants, get on a public bus and say, I need help. And those folks at those organizations are trained to call Safe Place Services here in Louisville, which is a branch of our YMCA. And they have volunteers who will go out, pick up kids, bring them back to our location and say, what's going on? How can we help? So Jim started off volunteering at Safe Place Services. Eventually he got on the board. He led the board of that particular branch. Eventually he gets onto the board of the association. So he's been leading in the Louisville Y for 20 years. Oof. Yeah, and so, and I see that at the church too. There's a gentleman named Eric who over and over again I see that he really believes in making a difference. And it's so cool too. He's a professor over at Indiana University Southeast. IU Southeast, I guess, is right across the river from us. Louisville is. Sure. I don't know where. There's all these little cities over there. It's over in Indiana.
Yeah, right.
IU is over there, and he's a professor there. But he's a believer in Jesus, and he really wants to make an impact on people's lives. So he was actually engaged years ago in developing a program and a curriculum that it's like a 24-month program, something like that, meeting weekly, where it's cohort based. You start the program, and it's also either men meet with men or women meet with women, so they kind of separate out. But you're with your group for that whole duration, and you're studying and reading and talking about. Sometimes you're reading the Bible, sometimes you're reading articles about personal growth or whatever. But the goal of the course wasn't just to make people smarter. Even though he's a professor, you might think that was the goal. The goal was actually to help people become leaders. Mm-hmm. And Eric has given so much of his time to that program and so many others. And so I really believe the role of the volunteer, I think it's easy to overlook the impact a volunteer can have. Because sometimes, at least as a staff person, I feel like we can feel like it's just easier if we do it ourselves, get it done quickly. Because our volunteers are already busy and all that. But the reality is, once you tap into someone's passion, you got to make sure you don't abuse them, right? Because they will give you so much time and energy, and they'll give a lot. So that's neat to see all over the place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You do have to measure their contribution, at least mentally, and make sure that you don't burn them out, because you want them there for the 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. So tell me as you're looking forward now from where you are right now. Well, let me back up just a little bit. Before we take a forward look, from where you are right now at Southeast Christian Church, what's one or maybe two things that you've already done that really make you feel very good about having had an opportunity to do those things for the church.
Well, this example may sound trivial, but for me, actually it's funny to say, because for me, I still haven't even fully embraced it. It's a leadership thing. I guess in the context of weekend groups, I'll describe that. So these weekend groups or these classes, we have roughly, let's say 50 of them that meet
Wow.
on Saturday or Sunday. And so every class has a teacher and sometimes co-teachers and sometimes 3 teachers. They split up the
Sure.
load there. There's also leaders of classes. But I guess just focusing on the teachers, with that number of folks that fill in and all that, pretty quickly the number of people that teach regularly is at least 80 people.
Wow.
But it might even balloon up to 100 or so.
Whew.
And early on, I really believed, and I really was coached by my supervisor, hey, get to know everybody that serves in your ministry. So I was going out to coffee with folks and meeting just amazing folks every day. But I really began to realize at one point, if I really want to impact these folks, I guess there's a few ways to do that. One way is to say, hey, everybody, mandatory meeting. Show up Wednesday night, we're going to have Chick-fil-A and we're going to talk about transforming lives. And, not taking into account the fact that probably of these 80 teachers or so, 95% of them are still working full-time. Many
right.
of them have kids and they're volunteering in other places.
Right.
So it's kind of like, wow, how do I get time with all these folks in a meaningful way where they don't resent, I have to go to this mandatory meeting. So I really shied away from mandatory meetings, and the model that I'm really still trying to implement, and it's slow and methodical, but it's actually, it's not even me. I can't even take credit for it. I've told a lot of people, when you look at the life of Jesus, that Jesus didn't spend the majority of his time, as recorded in the Gospels, with everybody he could all the time. He spent the most of his time with his closest disciples, because he really knew that if he spent closest time with the most time with the disciples that were closest, and then would teach them how to go out and do the same, that the aspect of multiplication would take place. So it's the matter of, there were times where stories in the Bible talk about Jesus being with 5,000 people or 4,000 people. That's recorded like twice in the Bible.
Yeah.
But the number of times where he's sitting, and I presume he's sitting around a campfire or under a tree one day, and he's with the 12 disciples and sometimes even the closer 3, that happened probably almost daily. And so he's just doing life with them. Here's what it looks like to really understand the writings of Moses. Here's what it really looks like to implement, what God wants for your life. So I think about that and thought, okay, if Jesus didn't spend the majority of his time with as many people as possible because he knew his time was limited, so he invested in a few so they could go out, maybe I should follow that model. And that's not original to me. Someone else really challenged me to consider that. So that's what I'm trying to implement. So I've got some guys who, some of them, I have 5 right now, 5 of these guys. 4 of them are active teachers, and one of them is not even an active teacher. And when I talked to him, his name's Matt. I said, Matt, I really feel like you have the kind of character that would make you a great leader of leaders, essentially. And he said, well, Brad, I'm not teaching a class. I've actually never have taught in a class. I said, Matt, that's not what I'm actually looking for. I'm looking for the person who has your kind of character and your kind of heart that cares for other people. Because really what's more important for me right now is letting all the teachers know we care about them and we want to hear their needs and we want to pray for them and all that. So on a regular basis, I get to meet with this group of leaders and then they actually go out and meet with others. And I know for some folks early on that probably kind of felt odd, like, why am I going to meet with Matt and not Brad? Because Brad's the leader over this ministry.
Right.
But it's really this aspect of, I believe that all of our leaders need time with someone else, but I'm not good enough. I'm not fast enough or quick enough or smart enough to know how to spread all that around. And so I have to work through other people. And I haven't fully implemented that. I'm going slowly with it, trying to figure it out. Because I joked with the guys and said, really for the first almost year of doing it, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Because it's a whole nother thing. I can try to lead a leader, but to lead a leader of leaders, that's a different aspect of of leadership, essentially. So I've been learning quite a bit what to do, what not to do, and all that. But I'm excited about that because I think the reality is, if I'm trying to do everything on my own,
Yep.
I'm not going to succeed. It's just not going to work. But if I can work through other people, then there's the potential for some real change to take place. And so that's exciting to me.
That's a great story, and you've hit on one of my own. It's the way I react to the word mandatory.
Yeah.
It just seems like, okay, yeah, I'll drag myself there, and because I've been told it's mandatory, I'll comply. But that's not engaging the spirit of the whole situation, of the whole purpose. That's getting compliance for, you have a body in a seat.
Right.
And that's not what you want. Well, I mean, maybe if that is what you want, then mandatory
Yeah.
works. But in your case, that's absolutely not what you're describing. What you want, and so I think that's a brilliant job, and it really, like you've alluded to, it only makes sense. It is that if you want to reach out and do all of these things yourself, one person at a time, you're going to reach far fewer people than if you can reach one person, and that if you can reach 10 persons yourself, and each of those 10 persons can reach 10 persons, now your reach in effect is 110 persons. So it's more than tenfold by kind of focusing like that.
Yeah, and that principle, I mean, people would say, sounds like the perfect pyramid scheme, right? People get it when it comes to sales, but for some reason, sometimes, at least for someone like me, the reluctant leader or the slow learner or whatever it is, that idea isn't intuitive. I mean, it's taken me a while to realize that's really what it takes, Brad. And yeah, you're not all that, Brad. Yeah, you're one guy, but you can work through others, and that's really where something's going to happen. So I'm still learning about that, but pretty excited about not only the aspect of what can be done, but then the fact that I get to meet with this smaller group of guys regularly. These guys are really special to me,
Yeah.
and I see the way that they lead, and it's not a matter of me saying, Matt, here are the things I need you to do. It's more like we just spend time together.
Right.
And so if we say, hey, one of the important strategies or focuses for our church is that we really want people to be a people of prayer, that we pray regularly, and not kind of just because you're supposed to, but because we really want to pray.
Right.
So how do we model that? Or, what does that look like? How do we talk about it? Whatever. Well, so I'll have those kind of conversations with my close group of leaders, and they kind of permeate that out to others. So it's much more meaningful. It's if we're meeting in a coffee shop or whatever. To me, that's better than meeting, in a big room with lots of chairs and rows, saying, "Okay, guys, go pray. Just go do it." So it's not been easy for me to learn that though, because frankly, there's been times where I think, how do I do this? What am I actually asking these people to do? Because I don't want him to go home thinking, am I wasting my time? Because why doesn't Brad just do his job? I have to really be able to communicate. I can kind of do it, but it can be so much better if we do this together.
Right. So that's great, and which now I'm going to ask you to sort of project out into the future, and that is everybody's got or I would imagine at least everybody either wants to have goals or has some kind of goals or has some kind of what the business world calls BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And what's one challenge or one target that you're aiming for in your either in your life or in your work or whatever?
I'll start off with my work, and I can't really claim this as my own goal. But I can see where it's lived out in the areas where I have accountability. One of the things I'll say about my church, I love my church, and Southeast has, we're 52 years old, I guess. We're a healthy church, not perfect by any means. There's plenty of issues because people like me actually belong here. but there still is this sense that in order to come here, you gotta clean yourself up,
Uh-huh.
right? You gotta don't go in and talk about your drug problem, or don't go in and talk about the fact that you had an abortion, or don't go in and talk about whatever else. And we really want to, I guess, for those of us that are already here,
Mm-hmm.
to recognize that's not how it is. And I don't see any time where Jesus said, before you can come to me, you must clean yourself up.
Right.
That's just not how Jesus worked. So I'm not being critical of my brothers and sisters that belong here also. But it's easy if once you belong to something for a long time, especially if you grew up in the church, it's real easy to begin to have we don't do that here kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just want to see that. I want to see that change over time. And I don't mean sometimes people could misinterpret that and say, oh, well, then you're not taking serious a call to be holy, or you're not taking your faith seriously. You're compromising your values and morals, those kind of things. And I say, no, it's really not that. It's really the idea that we want to be welcoming, not just friendly, but welcoming to folks. And that's not easy necessarily. So that's one of my goals as it pertains to like the groups that I get to interact with. I'd love to hear people say, wow, our group is growing, and it's grown primarily from people that they're not even a member of the church. Their neighbor comes to our class, and the neighbor said, hey, come check out my class because it's full of people who just are so caring and welcoming and loving, and we like getting together, and we study God's Word, and if you're open to that, we'd love to have you come with us.
Right.
I'd love to hear that those communities are healthy, and people say, I want to be part of that because I actually felt like I belonged when I didn't look anything like the people from any level. So that's one goal, and that's just a matter of helping over time people see there's different ways to acknowledge others, that you don't have to clean yourself up before you come over here.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, absolutely. I look at that in the context of inclusiveness, and if you want to put put it under a spiritual light, who did Jesus heal? Who did Jesus visit? He visited lepers.
Yeah.
He was engaged with, or he reached out to, the poor, the people not in the in crowd, if you will. He didn't isolate himself and put himself in an ivory tower, but he mixed with all of the people that really, that's where the outreach is. And I know there are special outreach groups into inner city areas, but you're absolutely right. At least that's my opinion, and I share with you that if you isolate yourselves and construct a sort of a wall of arrogance almost around, unintentionally maybe, but that's the way that it comes across, is you cut yourself off from being able to provide the really transformative life services so that you can expand that group, so that neighbor can come in, so that drug addict can become an ex-drug addict, right? So
Yeah.
all of those kinds of things, and that you're right. The culture tends to want to be sort of like a hospital environment, sort of everything's clean, everything is always perfect like that. Well, then somebody's got to be doing some outreach at some point. That would be my perspective on that. So I hope to hear next time that we chat what your progress is on that sort of growth aspect as well, because it will result in growth.
Yeah, it's funny, even the timing of the conversation. Tomorrow night, when my class gets back together, we're looking at the story in the Bible where Jesus has actually gone over to the house of a Pharisee who was a religious zealot.
Yep.
And in this story, and this is a story that people that come from a background of Christianity are pretty familiar with, the time when there's actually a prostitute who comes,
Yep.
and she's so overwhelmed with Jesus forgiving her ultimately that she has this jar of perfume that literally would have been used for her profession, right?
Right.
So she uses what's described as a year's worth of perfume. She pours over Jesus, and she's washing his feet with
Yep.
her hair,
Yep.
and she's crying and all that. And that story of and Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, get away from me," you know. He actually lifts her up and honors her, and the sense is, whoa, from people around him, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And we even talked last week. Jesus was called a friend of sinners and tax collectors.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Tax collectors were not the best people,
Right.
even in Jesus' day. And that's how he's described. So, yeah, quick story. Personally, there's a friend of mine who's now, he comes to my class Saturday night. In fact, tonight, I mentioned a baby shower. It's
Yep.
his baby going to be born.
Okay.
My friend Steve has a history. He's young, 33 years old. Early on, he developed a drug habit. And he said the cops, as he went in and out of prison or jail multiple times, cops described him as a good kid with a bad drug habit. And he started off very innocently, experimenting and all that. Boy, eventually it gets to where he is doing all kinds of drugs. And his story could almost be a movie. This is a true story. He and his friend were trying to figure out how can we get more money so that we can actually get drugs. And they got this idea that they would impersonate cops, that they would do their own drug busts, and they did it. They would go and bust guys. They would take their drugs and take their money. They bought their own Crown Victoria because that looked like a cop car.
Yeah.
And literally this turned into one night. There's somehow they get caught. They're chased in their car by a cop. They get caught, and so Steve's going to jail. This is 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And initially he was going to get possibly like 18 years or something like that. And because of previous serving time, and because of really, I think a lot of it because of his attitude, and ultimately his dad, who happened to be a corrections officer, come in and taking responsibility for his son, saying, "I'm sorry, he messed up, and I'm going to take responsibility for it." The judge only gave Steve I think it was 10 or 12 years. So last year in May, Steve gets out of prison, and he'd been in for 10 years, moved around different prisons, and started his wife. He got married not long before he actually had to go in for this long sentence because she didn't want to lose him. And his wife was faithful to him the whole time he's in prison, and going and visiting him, all that kind of stuff. Well, he gets out of prison, and this whole time she's been coming here to Southeast. So this is a big part of her life. And initially, Steve, although he was already a believer, he became a believer in prison. He said, "I don't know about Southeast. I don't think I really want to go there. I've heard things about it that I don't like." And Paul was like, "Come on, just try it, because I've been going here for so long. It's my church." Steve comes, and I think like the next week he says, "I want to join this church." And that night, I happened to be back talking with new folks joining the church, and I was there that night when he comes back. And so that's when our relationship began. And fast forward almost a year, he's in my class now. And what's for me so neat about even my little class of 40 folks, traditionally, these are people that have been in the church for probably decades.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Some of them are in their 60s and 70s, and I would describe them as good people. That a lot of their messy life is in the past.
Right.
They're squeaky clean almost.
Right.
And here's Steve, who, although he's been done with drugs for many years, that's still part of his story.
Sure.
And so we just, it was a couple months ago, he said, "Can I share my story in class?"
Oh, powerful.
Absolutely. So he gets up and shares, what he had come through and his habit and his addiction with drugs, and where he is now, and how now he wants to lead his family. He wants to take care of his wife. And he actually has 3 kids already, so he wants to take care of his 3 kids, and now his 4th child's coming. So
wow.
There's a story of actually seeing in my group, people say, "Wow, he's a neat guy." And he brings some life to the group that's exciting. So it's happening. I mean, it really is happening. So we just want to see more of it.
That's a great story. That's actually, it really rings a bell of like something that I've seen either on TV or something with, these people impersonating cops, and then busting drug dealers, right? And taking either taking their money or I don't know. Yeah, maybe it was on The Wire or something like. Anyways, it's that you're right. That's just made for a Hollywood movie or a TV series or something. That's too good. So
Yeah.
we're coming up. We've actually gone here a little bit over an hour, Brad. Unbelievable. These are great stories, and I'm convinced everybody's got great stories if they just would take a moment and think through those. So I'm excited that we've got 7 more hours to go. Um,
Right.
right?
1 hour in the books.
But as we start to wrap up, you've shared quite a bit of your 15-year-old story when you were 15 years old, rather. I mean, and you've shared that story. I was just wondering. I know we haven't talked here yet, but maybe you can tell just a little bit, tell people a little bit about you and your family situation, and share a little bit about that we'll use as sort of a going away segment.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. Uh, Married Kim in '98, so we've been married 16 years.
Wow.
We were in college when we got married, and that was kind of a fun experience early on when I went to her dad to ask, can I marry your daughter? And I already had a good relationship with her father, and thought this is going to be easy. I was scared, but I thought this is going to be easy. And I can remember so clearly when he said, I don't have a problem with you marrying my daughter, but I have a problem with your timetable. And I thought, oh no, because this was actually earlier in our college experience. He said, we want to make sure Kim graduates college.
Hmm.
And so we said, okay, we'll wait. We'll wait. But that changed, and I guess Kim's parents kind of came to a point. They said, you know what, these kids are going to stay together, and they're committed to school. And so, yeah, the year before our senior years when we got married, left Cincinnati, went to Michigan, and lived in Michigan for almost 2 years, and then came to Louisville, and have been here since 2000. And now have 4 children, a 9-year-old, Sarah Jane, who's effectively the second mother in the house, as much as I have to remind her, you're not the mom. She likes to serve in that capacity. And she's really good at it, actually. So I should be more thankful than perhaps I am. But Elijah is our almost 7-year-old. He's about 6 weeks away from hitting 7. Ezekiel is 3.5, and he's a mini me. People see him and they look at me and they look at him and they're like, whoa, because he has buzz cut, red hair. Sarah Jane and Ezekiel are redheads. Ezekiel, he looks quite a bit like me. So I don't know if that in the long term is going to be good or bad, but that's where he is. And then our 4th, her name is Solideo, and Solideo is 6 months old. And that's fun, having a baby again. Just new life and new experiences and getting to try new foods and all that kind of stuff. It's fun to go back through those phases of life. This morning, 2 nights ago, Sarah Jane said, Daddy, what do you think about if actually it was supposed to be just her and I initially. What if you and I go out and we either ride our bikes or we go for a run at 6:30 in the morning? And I thought, well, this actually, part of me wanted to say, no, I'm still drinking coffee at 6:30. I'm not willing to do that. But then I thought, no, this will be good because, Sarah Jane's 9. She's definitely come into a different phase of life. Pretty soon she's going to enter that tween phase or whatever and all that. Yeah, let's try it. Well, yesterday it didn't work out. So this morning I wanted to make sure it worked out. Well, it turned into Sarah Jane, Elijah, and Ezekiel, all of us heading out at 6:30 a.m. because they all woke up. Thought, let's go ahead and get out of the house. And it was funny because on this trip out of the house, just in the neighborhood, going around the block,
sure.
going to the little local park, pretty quickly could find myself getting a little bit frustrated. Slow down, your brother's in the lead, let him lead, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm falling into this rules-based, legalistic dad, and be nice and all that. And at one point, some man goes riding by on a bicycle, and he just waves and he said something like, "Good dad," and kind of gives me a wave. And I thought, oh man, that makes me feel so good because I don't feel that way very often. So that was a neat experience today of recognizing sometimes it literally is the little things that can make a difference. So that's a wee little snapshot of our life. It's crazy at our house. My mom lives with us too. Mom moved in back in March. So tight space, but we love it. It's actually neat. I've not lived in the same town with my folks since I left for college.
Sure.
So, that's been a long time.
Sure.
And now having mom with us, and obviously mom getting to spend time with the grandkids, it's been neat getting to experience a whole different aspect of life that just haven't had that experience with. So we're busy all the time, it seems like, but life is good, and we're grateful for that.
Well, Brad, that's a great story to wrap it up. I mean, we've gone all the way back, and we end today with a story from today. Um, doesn't get much. I couldn't have scripted that if I had even tried. So I want to thank you, and this is going to wrap up this session of triangulation. And I really want to thank Brad Ricca, my friend and former colleague, formerly of the Y, now with Southeast Christian Church. And if you like what you've heard here now, just follow along. Here we'll have other guests, and they will be of the same caliber, but they will all have individual stories. I can absolutely guarantee you that you will never hear the exact same story twice, and they're all from the heart, and they're all focused around a cause, and I make sure that we try to include that holistic concept of spirit, mind, and body. So I'm going to close out this session and say thank you again, Brad, and that'll do it for this session of Triangulation.